In the hush of a small Lyon neighborhood, where the summer air shimmered and the afternoons seemed to stretch on forever, Julien's world was drawn in chalk and silence. He was 8, old enough to remember laughter, but young enough to still believe in miracles. His grandmother's house, with its heavy curtains and creaking floors, was a place of quiet routines. Tea in the afternoon, the distant sound of a radio, the soft clatter of knitting needles. But beneath the calm lay an ache, a question that no one dared to answer. Where had his mother gone? Julien filled the silence with his own creations. Each morning, he'd gather his colored chalks and kneel on the warm pavement, sketching cities that only he could visit. There were winding streets and bustling squares, bridges over rivers, and parks filled with imaginary children. He'd draw tiny cars and little houses, sometimes adding a figure with long flowing hair, a secret tribute to the mother he missed. He liked to believe those cities were places she might visit too, if only she could find her way back. The neighbors watched him from behind their lace curtains, whispering stories he was never meant to hear. Some said his mother had run away, others that she was gone forever. His grandmother, stern but gentle, never spoke a word against her daughter. She only said, "Some people leave because they must." Julien clung to the hope that must did not mean forever. That summer day, the world seemed suspended in golden light. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the only sounds were the distant chirping of cicadas and the scrape of Julien's chalk against the sidewalk. He'd just finished a castle, its towers crowned with flags, when a voice, soft, trembling, unmistakable, called his name. Julien's heart leapt. He looked up, expecting to see his grandmother or a neighbor, but the street was deserted. A stray cat dozed beneath a bush, and a bicycle leaned against a fence, but there was no one else. Still, the voice lingered, curling around him like a memory. He knew it as surely as he knew his own heartbeat. It was his mother's. He stood, chalk dust on his fingers, and listened. The faintest footsteps echoed from behind the hedge by the old bakery. Without thinking, he ran, his feet pounding the pavement, his mind racing with hope and fear. Turning the corner, he saw her. She was thinner than he remembered, her skin pale against the shadow of her long grey coat. Her hair, once long and golden, was now short and dark, framing a face etched with exhaustion. But her eyes, those deep, familiar eyes, were unchanged. They met his, wide with longing and regret, and filled with tears. Julien froze, caught between the urge to run to her and the fear that she might vanish if he moved. The world seemed to narrow to that single moment, the space between them heavy with all the words left unspoken. She took a tentative step back, as if unsure she was welcome. Her lips parted, and she whispered his name again, softer this time, almost a question, as if seeking permission to exist in his world once more. Before Julien could move, his grandmother appeared, breathless and anxious. She wrapped her arms around him, shielding him from the woman she once called daughter. Her stance was protective, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions: anger, fear, and an aching sorrow. The woman did not protest. She simply nodded, her gaze lingering on Julien, as if trying to memorize every detail of his face. And then she turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the heat and light of the afternoon. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Julien lay in bed, the memory of his mother's voice echoing in his mind. He wanted to ask his grandmother what had happened, why she had left, why she had come back, only to leave again. But the weight of those questions pressed down on him, and he said nothing. His grandmother, too, was silent. Over dinner, she spoke only in gentle, practical phrases. "Eat your soup, Julien. It's getting cold." But as she tucked him in, she offered a single explanation. Some people leave not because they want to, but because they feel they have no choice. Julien tried to understand, but the words felt slippery, impossible to grasp. In the days that followed, his drawings changed. The cities disappeared, replaced by faces, eyes wide and searching, mouths that tried to smile but never quite succeeded. He drew his mother again and again, trying to capture the sadness in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she reached for him. Summer faded into autumn, and Julien never saw her again. The memory of that day became a secret he kept close, a fragile hope that she was still out there, somewhere. 2 years passed. Julien grew taller, his hair longer, his silence deeper. Then, on a grey winter morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to him, the handwriting unfamiliar, but the envelope scented with lavender, a scent he remembered from his mother's dresses. Inside was a photograph, a woman standing in front of a building in Marseille, holding a newspaper with that day's date. She looked older, her smile hesitant, but her eyes were unmistakable. There was a note written in shaky script. "If you want to find me, ask your grandmother about December 12th. Julien's heart pounded. December 12th was his birthday. That evening, as the sky darkened and the house filled with the smell of roasting chicken, Julien found his grandmother in the living room. He sat beside her, the letter clutched in his hand, and asked about that day. His grandmother's face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, and she sat down heavily, as if the weight of memory was too much to bear. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, she told him the story. On his 6th birthday, Julien's mother had taken him to the zoo. It was a day of laughter and sunshine, of giraffes and ice cream, and the yellow scarf she wore like a banner of hope. They had walked hand in hand, her arm strong around his shoulders. Nothing seemed amiss, but that night, after Julien had fallen asleep, she vanished. She returned days later, changed, quieter, thinner, carrying a small stuffed animal as a peace offering. It was the first of many disappearances, each one leaving her more fragile, her smiles rarer. She battled something invisible, a darkness that dimmed her spirit and stole her strength. Eventually, one night, she left and did not return. Julien listened, tears slipping down his cheeks as his grandmother spoke of love and loss, of the pain of watching someone you care for slip away without a sound. She spoke of her daughter's struggle, not with the vices people whispered about, but with an illness of the mind, a sorrow that could not be cured with medicine or kind words. When the story was done, Julien asked a single question. Could they go to Marseille? His grandmother hesitated, her hands trembling. But seeing the hope in Julien's eyes, she nodded. 2 weeks later, they boarded a train bound for the southern coast. The journey was long and cold, the landscape blurring past as Julien imagined what he would say if he saw his mother again. Would she recognize him? Would he recognize her? Marseille greeted them with rain and the salty tang of the sea. They found the building from the photograph, its windows streaked with water, flower pots bright against the grey stone. Julien's heart thudded as they climbed the stairs. His grandmother knocked, once, twice. The door opened, and there she was. Not a ghost, not a memory, but a woman. Older, sadder, but alive. She knelt, arms open, and Julien ran to her, burying his face in her coat. There were no words, only the warmth of an embrace that had been too long in coming. For 2 days they talked. His mother spoke of her struggles, her fears, her shame. She told him how she had wanted to come back, but had been afraid of failing, of hurting him, of being too broken to love. Julien listened, not fully understanding, but knowing that she was trying. When it was time to leave, they hugged again. She promised to write, and she kept her promise. Each week, a letter arrived, sometimes filled with stories, sometimes with apologies, always with love. Julien never saw her every day, never had the mother he once knew. But he had something else, a connection, a truth, a hope. He learned that forgiveness is not forgetting, but understanding. That love is not always easy, but it is always worth holding on to. And he learned that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is come back, even if it's just to say, "I'm still here." So Julien grew, carrying those letters with him. A reminder that even the most fragile bonds can endure. And every summer, when the sun was bright and the chalk dust clung to his hands, he remembered the day his mother called his name. And he knew that some stories, no matter how difficult, are worth telling.